I'm Kathy Jones. I'm one of the presenters for today. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. Oh. All right, so if you've gone to the Integrated Learning Conference before, you've probably remember the huge breakfast that they serve us. And we've all just, if we kind of imagine ourselves being at the conference, we've just gorged ourselves on a wonderful breakfast. Maybe you've attended the first session and you've all had a giant cup of coffee. Like I've already had my coffee this morning. I hope you guys have had your coffee too. And now we're sitting in our sessions and we're beginning to share some great ideas with each other. And I hope that you get some great ideas from my session today. I'm going to start you off with a little kind of brain teaser. It is kind of early in the morning. The question is, how many objects are in this glass? So I want you to take a second and kind of get an idea of how many things you think are in that glass. They look like little muffins to me, but I think they're erasers, but they look like they're in the shape of muffins. As the clues appear, you're going to use the clues to narrow down the possibilities to a smaller set of estimation. So clue number 1, the answer is a number that's less than 50. Clue number 2, the answer is an odd number. Clue number 3, so the answer is a multiple of 3. For example, 3, 6, 9, 12. The fourth clue is that the answer includes 2 different digits. And clue number 5 is that neither of the digits are 2 or 4. So if you were able to play along with this little estimation game, you've probably narrowed your list of possibilities down to just a small handful. And what you would do from there is that you would kind of use estimation on the size of the glass or how many that you can actually see in the glass to make a better guess. So you guys ready for the answer, and we'll see how many of you got the right answer. The answer is that there's 39 objects in that glass. So if you got the right answer, you get the gold star for the day. And we're going to go ahead and, now that we're all warmed up and energized, we're going to go ahead and go on to our session. Again, my name is Kathy Jones. I'm the math instructor at the Indiana County Technology Center. I would actually also say that I'm a coach because of a lot of teachers come to me for advice and for different strategies that they can use in their classroom. My partner, Val Dickerson from the Southern Regional Education Board, cannot be with us today. She has another commitment, but she is a great lady and she is here in spirit. If you ever need her, she has lots of information also. The goal of today is that you will be able to identify and implement strategies that increase active learning. Specifically, we're going to talk about what is teacher talk, when does it become an obstacle for student learning, what are some instructional routines that increase active learning, and what are some specific tools to increase active learning. I'm going to share some things that I use in my classroom. Now I'm more of a math-based person, so some of the examples that I'm going to show are more math related. I am not an expert in active learning. I am not an expert in reducing teacher talk. We are all works in progress is what I say, and we all have things to learn. But what I'd like to do today is share some things that I've learned along the way. And I hope that you have a few takeaways from the session. So to kind of describe what teacher talk is, I'd like to try to show you a short video. It's about 5 minutes and it explains what teacher talk is.
Kathy, we're not seeing
Oh,
the video.
you are not.
No.
Okay. Let's see. Thank you for telling me that. Let's see if I can go.
I think maybe we're seeing it as a blue, but we're not hearing it. You need to go in and click on use my speakers right when you start it.
Ooh. Well.
Use my computer's audio.
Oh, because you're not hearing it through my microphone.
Yeah.
Okay. Wait a minute.
If you go back out to share the screen, you'll see that option.
New share.
It's a little check mark at the bottom.
On the left.
Do I have to go? Share computer.
There we go.
Bingo.
Hold on, now we got other stuff going on. You bear with me, people. I'm sorry. Let's go back.
I'm sure everybody understands. It's just one of those things that happens.
Yeah.
But we'll get this worked out.
All right, can you hear it now?
First step of reducing teacher talking time?
Yes.
Simply to be aware
there
of
you
it.
go.
It's natural for us to want to help our students understand, but it's not.
Try to run back here.
In this video,
there you
we're
go.
going to talk about how to reduce your teacher talk time. But before we get started, here's a little teacher talk joke for you. The teacher asks her students, "Give me a sentence starting with I." A student says, "I is." And the teacher says, No, stop. Is never comes after I. Always put M after I. And the student says, "Okay, teacher, I am the 9th letter of the alphabet. As with any problem, the first step of reducing teacher talking time is simply to be aware of it. It's natural for us to want to help our students understand, but it's not always prudent. Sometimes, when we talk too much, we do more harm than good. Now, this behavior is natural, and most of us do it without even thinking. So in this video, we're going to address some ways to fix it. But before we get started, we need to know what teacher talk is. Teacher talk refers to the need for a teacher to speak in a modified or simplified way to accommodate the current level of students. Try to think of it this way. We all talk differently to different people. Imagine you ask the same question to 3 different people: a 4-year-old child, your father, and your best friend. Does it change things? It sure does for me. I use different language, I ask different follow-ups, and I'll certainly share different information with each one. Now try to apply this principle to your students. Excessive teacher talk time limits the amount of student talk time. Think about it this way. If the teacher talks for half the time in a 60-minute lesson with 15 students, each student only gets 2 minutes to speak, and that's at a maximum. To speak or not to speak? That is the question. Changing the way we speak requires a little more thinking and a lot of practice. And I'll tell you what, when I first started, I was terrible at teacher talk. But over time, my teacher talk got better. I learned how to eliminate unnecessary or confusing language, and it became almost a sixth sense. Now, in principle, this intuition is easy. It's easy to understand, and it's pretty easy to do. But it is hard to practice. It's hard to do each time, and it's hard to do every time. There are so many ways for us to slip back into increased teacher talk time. And here are 3 of the worst teacher talk habits: the over-explainer, the self-answerer, and the pause eater. The over-explainer is the type of teacher who plans a perfectly leveled activity for their students, but then uses a much higher level to explain it. The over-explainer seemingly asks for trouble. They offer information even when students are not puzzled, curious, or even ask for it. Try not to be smarter than the room. You might want to offer the information only if students seem puzzled or curious, or if in the context of a classroom discussion, the information would be particularly meaningful. In this situation, you're trying to keep it short. You're trying to answer only the question that the student has asked. This is important because that student may be interested in the question, but the rest of the class may not be. Sometimes, words simply aren't our best choice. I mean, explaining something well is really difficult. Just because you don't explain it in your teacher talk doesn't mean that you don't want students to find out about it for themselves. You can transmit the information by other methods. You could have students look it up. You could act it out. Or you could even draw pictures on the board. The self-answerer is the type of teacher who's worried about wasting time and gives the answer after a second or 2. The self-answerer creates a twofold problem. First, they lower their students' confidence. And second, they teach students that they don't need to answer because the teacher will. As odd as it may seem to some teachers, silence can be a great technique because it creates interest and elicits student participation. The pause eater is the type of teacher who moves with too much pace. Think about the lines from Dickens. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. Versus, it was the best of times. It was the worst of times. Pretty big difference, isn't there? Pausing is a very powerful tool, as it allows students time to process what the teacher is saying. And it also allows the teacher time to look around the room and assess learner comprehension to see who understands and who doesn't. These bad teacher talk habits rob students of the time and confidence to speak English. Always try to remember that if you are talking, your students are not. In closing, here's a final tip. Eyes and revise. The best language teachers are always paying attention to learners' eyes. If your students look like this, it's time for some modification.
All right, so in that video, it kind of talked a little bit about what the research shows, but the research shows that a lot of classrooms follow a pattern of language, an initiation, response, feedback type of structure. The teacher asks the question, the student answers, teacher has feedback. So if the teacher does that with every student, if they have 25 students in their class, and they do that with with all 25 of them, that means that there's 75 pieces of communication that are in the class, but the teacher is actually talking 50 times and each student is only getting to talk once. That doesn't even take into consideration the opening of a class, the closing of a class, directions. There's a lot of teacher talk there. A hindrance to learning when you have too much teacher talk, in my opinion, is that if you ever had a student that it's obvious what they should do next, but they will sit there and wait for you to tell them what to do next. And that's because I think that they've become conditioned to that teacher talk, that I have to wait for the teacher to tell me what to do next. It's something that I've tried to do to reduce teacher talk in my own classrooms is that if a student comes to me and asks me a question, I usually respond, well, what do you think? And that gets a little bit of dialogue going back and forth between us because I don't want to just give them the answer. I want them to maybe get some confidence that they've gotten the answer on their own and they already know it, but through that conversation, they'll be able to move forward. The other thing that I've tried to implement in my class is that I don't let students off the hook anymore. If I ask a question and I call on them and they say, I don't know, I'm trying to get in the habit of saying, all right, Johnny, I'm going to come back to you. And then I go to another student and ask that other student to answer the question. Then I'll come back to Johnny and say, can you summarize what Stephen answered? Or re-ask the question to Johnny, because a lot of students, when they say, I don't know, the teacher moves on and they're off the hook and they don't have to engage. So those are just a few things that I've tried to implement in my classroom. What is the antidote to excessive teacher talk? It's trying to get students involved and active in their learning. All the research shows that we learn by doing things. That is, applying what we've learned in order to answer questions and to build on the learning that we've already had. This makes sense in the learner process the information and make their own sense about it. They own it when they're actively involved. Research shows that active learning will create deeper learning and higher achievement. It creates a better recall by students because it's attaching it to different parts of the brain when they're actively involved. Helps the students develop higher order reasoning skills. They enjoy it more. A lot of times it's a little bit more fun to be involved instead of just sitting in a class. Like if we were actually in session today and we were all in person, you guys would be a lot more involved in my session, especially with the activities that I'm going to show you. But active learning also addresses different learning styles. Students that are not necessarily good auditory learners don't do well with pure lecture. They need to create, they need to do things. This is called constructivism. I can't say that word very well, but the students have more ownership in the material. I once read something that it said that a teacher should change their path or their structure or their strategy every 5 to 10 minutes. It's crazy. Every 5 to 10 minutes in order to keep the students engaged. Well, that is sometimes true, but to some degree, students love structure and they love routine. And if they know what's going to happen next, they can have that effective filter kind of decreased. So I'm going to share a few strategies where you can try to get your students to promote their talking in class and reduce your teacher talk. So you never want to say anything that you can try to make your students say. One way is using the 3 modes of communication. So the goals of the 3 modes of communication is that students will go beyond their traditional role as responder. Teacher asks the question, they respond to the question, that they're going to go beyond that. Students will use language in meaningful ways, and that they will negotiate with their fellow classmates and try to have a conversation, a discussion about the material. They will engage in real life activities in a non-threatening environment. Therefore, that effective filter, that need for safety is reduced. So to kind of highlight the different pieces of the 3 modes of communication, the first is the interpret, where a student would have individual time to identify what they know and what they don't know about a particular subject. They would clarify that what needs to be addressed, and they would write this all down in pencil. So it was all their personal feeling and understanding about the material. Then the interpersonal, and this is what's kind of hard to do during our current situation because you're asking students to pair and share for a fixed amount of time. So they would use maybe a different color pencil or pen so that you know that both students are engaging in the activity. The idea is that students can see each other as a resource for learning, that the teacher is not the only teacher in the class, that they can learn things from other people. I've heard that in this section and in this area where you compare students, that there's such thing as breakout rooms in Google Meets, which I don't know how to use yet. That's why I'm going to attend the next session that says work smarter, not harder with technology. So hopefully maybe somebody will show me how to do breakout rooms so I can pair my students better. The third section is presentational. And the teacher strategically chooses pairs of students to share to the class. So during that interpersonal phase, the teacher is walking around and seeing what groups are doing and showing what the teacher wants. So they specifically pick that group to present. And therefore the teacher is not presenting the material, but the individual students are presenting the material. At the end of the 3 modes of communication, the teacher can always bring back together the whole class as a summary to correct any misconceptions about the material. So that's how you can use the 3 modes of communication routine. And since it's a routine, the students would always know those are the 3 different sections. Also with group work, you can make different jobs for each of the students. For example, a timekeeper, a technoscribe, a reporter, a facilitator. Giving the students different jobs where they actually have to perform that job in order for the success of the whole group makes everybody accountable for doing something. So how we use active learning to remember what we've learned is that I've said this earlier, that being involved in the lesson, in the learning, helps the student attach that material to a different memory, a different activity. It's through to a different part of the brain. So therefore, you're adding another link to that material in the brain, and the students are more likely to remember what you're teaching them. It's kind of the philosophy of using mnemonics in class. You're attaching it to a different part of the brain. I mean, there are times that I've tried to remember something and I say, oh yeah, I was doing that when I did this other thing, and it helps me remember. So some specific activities that promote active learning. This ST Mysteries, this is the item that or the activity that I showed you at the beginning of class. You can click on this link down here below, and it'll take you to a whole bunch of these little clues and games, all different other kind of games, including ST Mysteries. I use ST Mysteries because my goal is to try to get students to be able to problem solve and do that higher order thinking, but I find that a lot of my students are so low in their numeracy facts that I can't get them to problem solve because they can't reason that 15 divided by 2 isn't 20. You know, that they don't know when they've gotten a wrong answer. So these little games, often I do these at the beginning of class, and then because it's a game, the students don't even really realize that they're practicing anything. And for maybe a lower level student, I'll provide a number chart like this so that they can kind of scratch off possible answers as we're going through the clues. Good. And all these links that I'm showing you here today, I'm going to try to put those into the chat so that you can get them toward the end of the session here. The next activity is our card sorts. And card sorts can work for vocabulary, they can work for on paper, they can work on Google. I'm going to try to show you a Google slide that I made. There are activities that get the students talking and doing things. Usually I have these cards. I'm trying to show you, and I hope they're not backwards, but these cards where a student will work with another student and they will try to match these cards with equivalent values. And I have in this activity, I have fractions, decimals, percentages, and locations on the ruler. Because I come from a CTE background, a lot of my activities are based off of CTE. I push into the classroom once a week to teach math. So they would sit, if I was in class with students, they would sit with a partner and try to match these. And if you notice, these cards have little blank spaces. What I've done is I put a piece of clear tape, like clear packing tape over top of that, so they can write on it with dry erase markers, and then I can use these over and over in my classes. But in today's world, we are trying to do everything on Google. So I'm going to try to present this link. We'll see. And this is a Google slide that I've made, and I've opened the sharing so that you guys can go in and make a copy of it for yourself and then edit it as well. So what the students would do here is, so you would put this on Google Classroom, make a copy for each student. So then they could click and drag these, oops,
Yeah, Kathy, I don't think that worked.
Okay. Well, they could click and drag the different items. Let me go back here and share this screen. Now, can you see it?
Yes, that's great.
Okay. So what the students would do is they would click and drag these, each of the different things, the percents, the decimals, the fractions. So then you can have those conversations, and it's kind of like your card sort, but you're doing it virtual. And the next slide in the Google presentation would be trying to get them to realize the different rules and different things that you would do to know that two fractions are equivalent, and get them to explain. And then also decimals, percentages. But when we can do those card sorts on virtual on Google Slides. Let me go back and share my. There, we should be back to the presentation slide. So that's an example of card sorts. My next thing that I want to show you is fraction ruler strips. And this is something that I've kind of, I believe I've come up on on my own. And what you would do is have the students start off with a very long piece of paper, kind of like 11 by 17. And actually, I need to backtrack for a second. Why this is so important. My daughter is in middle school right now, and she was taking a technology class, and her teacher in the technology class was teaching her how to count tick marks to measure. So she would count the tick marks and get, 10/16, and then he would have them reduce it to 5/8. And that was all great and fine and dandy, because if the line already exists, but if you're in a CTE standpoint or viewpoint, we're creating the lines. So 5/8, if you're counting tick marks, you don't know where 5/8 is. So this ruler activity kind of helps the student understand where the different values are and what the size of the marks on the ruler mean, and how to identify them all. So you would have a student, and this Google Drive, this form down here, shows you how step by step how to go through this. But you'd have the students fold the paper, and you would ask them to write 1/2 right in the middle, so you can discuss what 1/2 means. And then you would have the students fold it again, and that would create fourths, and you can have a discussion of what fourths are. But you'd have them write 1/4, the 2/4 would go right underneath the 1/2, and the 3/4 would go there. And if we were in session, I would have you guys do this too. You'd have them fold again, so you're down to a smaller piece of paper. And you can have a discussion of what eighths are. And you would have them write 1/8. The 2/8 would go right underneath the 1/4. 3/8, 4/8, 5/8, and so on. So as you can see, the columns are starting to form there. And you can have conversations about equivalent fractions, and you would actually have the students fold it one more time so that they could get the 16ths in there. And if you, then I would have them use a highlighter to highlight the columns. And if you notice, the columns will coincide with the lengths and the size of the marks that are on the ruler. So then you can have more discussions about, oh, all the 16ths are the small marks, and the next size up, those are called the 8ths. And then that way a student can actually recognize a measurement based on the size of the tick mark on the ruler instead of counting those 16ths. All right. So I'd kind of like to open this up for questions and answers if we have any of those. I want you to think about the lesson or the session today and ask what squares with your learning. As a result of today's session, what will you change? And what is still circling in your head, and what are you still wondering about? So go ahead and take a second and think about that before we open it up for questions. And while you guys are thinking, I'm going to go ahead and put those links to the documents in the chat. 3 tools that I gave you as far as the card sorts, the ST mysteries, the fraction ruler thing, I tried to make that as best that you can just take it and run with it. What I would say is that don't try to bite off more than what you can chew. Making small adjustments in your class and so that you can actually keep up with that pace. For me, not letting the kids off the hook when they can't answer a question was something small that I did just that I've been able to keep up with. So baby steps, and whatever baby steps you can do will be great for your students.
So the question is, how can we do some of this with online learning?
You know what, that is a struggle that all of us have. Looking at card sorts you can do online, the ST mysteries you can do online, because those ST mysteries are actually PowerPoints, and you can modify them, but yeah, we're all struggling there, and I don't necessarily know if I have a great answer.
Okay.
So
let's see. So somebody's asking about the definition of constructivism.
it's in education, they define it as students being able to construct their own learning instead of being told the facts, that they actually build the learning on their own. Well, guided by the teacher, but on their own.
So I'm just going to read this one. I think it's good. I really made me think about my teacher talk. I think I have conditioned kids to be too dependent upon me. I want them to be thinking about their next move and don't let the kids say, I don't know, off the hook. I need everyone to be engaged. I really like these mysteries as well as for my classroom. Obviously, I need to take reading lessons. Okay. We had several people in chat are talking about things they saw today that they liked, liking the card ruler to make them somebody's thinking about using it for measuring liquids, which is an interesting idea, rather than I think what you showed there was much more for measuring like a piece of wood or something.
Well, yes, the cards, you can kind of make those cards into anything that has equivalency to it. So you're a third cup and like 2 cups and a pint. They could match those together as well.
Yeah. So I see in a lot of the chat, people are struggling with how to really hold back. How do you manage that teacher talk? How do you manage it? Could you it's one thing to know that it happens, and I think you did a nice job on that, but how do you really get it to the point that you can practice it?
It's a hard thing to unlearn because I don't know the age of some of our people here in the session, but I've been teaching for over 20 years, and I have a bad problem with teacher talk as well. So I just try to make that conscious effort to say, all right, I need to slow down. I need to hold back and let them come on the question. The main things that I hold on to are not letting that kid off the hook, and also saying my first response to any question that a student has is, what do you think? And it even gets to the point where the kids get a little bit mad at me because that's the answer they get from me. I know that we are all pressured for time and for getting material done. That's why it's a struggle to reduce teacher talk, because you just need to press through that material, and waiting for students to develop it on their own is difficult.
Well, thanks. And so somebody here has made it not so much a question, but just an observation, has me thinking about what I need to really work on, more pausing and perhaps longer pausing, not saying something that the student can say. Several people have really said some positive things about how this might help them move forward.
Good. I'm great. I'm happy that everybody's pulling something from the presentation, and anytime anybody has a question or wants to contact me, they can contact me. I'll answer anything and share everything that I have.
So
I don't know if my email address is in the brochure. Is that?
It is not. I think
Okay.
it would be great if you put that in the chat.
I'm gonna put my email address into chat, and feel free to contact me. Anybody that's here, feel free to contact me anytime.
So here's a question. I missed this at the very top, and I guess I rolled the screen wrong. Do you find that students that will eventually attend a career and technical education program are not prepared enough for linear measurement, for example? Wait a minute.
Yeah.
I'm going to just say something. I worked at Pennsylvania College of Technology. It's not just high school kids. It seems that more focus on algebra or calc. How do we get more emphasis on math that equates to career and technical ed if a student is planning on attending that type of campus?
Yes, and yes. I believe that part of the problem, part of the deficiency in reading a ruler is that it has been removed from the Pennsylvania state standards for math. So the only way that a student in the younger grades would get using a ruler to measure not just inches. I mean, they talk about inches, but they don't necessarily use a ruler to measure to the 16ths in a lower level class. So the only way they're getting that is that if they take a wood shop or something in junior high, it's a daily struggle, and at a career and tech center. And it's also a daily struggle for students that are that are taught to count tick marks, because counting tick marks doesn't help us at all at a career and tech center. So I don't know how to make lower level teachers teach it, but it is a huge problem.
So we have just a comment. I have found that acknowledging the awkward science of wait time to my students reinforces the fact that they will wait that I will wait for their contribution to the discussion and learning. I think that, don't you find that to be uncomfortable though sometimes when you're waiting?
Well, you know what? If they're only going to be uncomfortable for a fixed number of times, because they're not going to want to feel that uncomfortableness all the time. They will eventually learn that she's not gonna let go of this, you know. So maybe it'll take a couple a month or two of doing that, but they'll learn that you're not going to let them off the hook.
Do you sometimes coach them along the way as they're in that silence? You can see they're really struggling, like they don't know. Are there some other intermediate like probes or questions you ever follow up with the students, so you don't let them off the hook, but yet you help them a little bit along the way?
What I tend to do is I'm walking around the classroom at that time. So if I notice that a student has something written down, or I'll say, oh, that's a really good idea, and they might be likely to share their information.
Okay. By the way, there seems to be a little groundswell of people pointing out how no one can read rulers. So yeah, that's fairly common.
Nobody can read a ruler. The days and time of helping grandpa in the shed, or helping even with liquid measurements, helping mom in the kitchen, I think those days are kind of slowly going away, and it's sad. So one person said something about we need to use STEM methods in math class, such as GRASS projects, to bring the trades to our CTE schools, I think a good resource for that would be the math T-charts. If you're a sending school math person, you can look at the math T-charts, and it'll give you applications of the math that you're teaching. And especially if you have a lot of CTE students in your class, they're going to be pretty amazed that you know that cylinder volume and the volume of a cylinder in math class is actually the same thing.
I'm just kind of reading through these. I think the two topics that keep going back is the issue of the ruler and the issue of that silence.
I see Jim Henry says that there's an app, because there's an app for that. And yeah, that's exactly true, because the app will do it for you. And that's what the students say. Well, I have an app for that. But I said, when you're standing on a roof, you're not really going to want to pull out your phone. First of all, you might fall. And second of all, you might drop your phone. So there are situations, that's my answer when a student says my phone will do it for me. And I usually make kind of funny comments about welding students and their phones while they're welding, that it's going to melt and all that stuff.
Or I had a welding instructor say to me once, he just started this way. He said, well, as I'm walking across that beam, and that just said it all to me. We were talking about knowing fractions, because that's the other topic that we haven't talked about today. So do you see this from Stephanie? Just occurred to me that the silence wait time is awkward because we're constantly overstimulated. I think we are. Go ahead.
I totally agree with that, that students are to the point where they need to be, it's like we need to entertain them. They're overstimulated, yes.
So we have time for like just maybe one last comment. And I guess I'm going to turn to you, Kathy, and say, well, how would you summarize, like what you think are the most important things you hope people take away from today's session?
Let me think.
I didn't mean to put you on the
That's
spot.
all right. Yes. The ruler, the folding the ruler has been extremely helpful for my students with knowing the marks on the ruler and why they are the length that they are. Like, why is the half the longest one? Well, it's because it actually has the most fractions that are equivalent to it. So the folding the ruler thing, and just trying to step back a little bit and making your students talk and making your students be engaged. That way, if you're making them do, then you're actually adding that different part of the brain and attaching the learning to a different memory.
Great. Well, thank you.